Yes, that is right. Welcome, everybody, on in to the Saturday Night Network for week number 2 of SNL's Greatest Cast Members series that we are producing here on the SNN. It is a momentous occasion as we are trying to put together the official list of the greatest cast members of all time. And every single week, we will be live with you throughout the fall on Mondays to reveal more names on the list as voted by you, the fans. In case you did miss it, we put up a poll on all social platforms. We also asked our podcasters and our patrons to contribute as well. And we got what we feel is the definitive list of the 50 greatest cast members of all time. So I'm very excited to discuss them all. And we have a couple of great guests with us tonight. We're going to have a ton of guests throughout the fall, including some of our best patrons who will be joining us, our greatest supporters here at the SNN. And if you would like to join us and become a patron, you could always do so at patreon.com/the SNL network. But without further ado, for week number 2 on the show, let's bring in a couple of excellent SNL analysts. And first up is my man, Andrew Haskell. Haskell, how are you doing? It's been a while.
John, I'm stressed out, okay? The top 50, week 1 is like week 1 at SNL. Everyone's just happy whoever made it, right? But week 2, now we start really getting into the discussion. You know, you're not just talking about I'm happy this guy made it or this woman is here. Nope. Now we're climbing up the list a little bit. The debate gets a little bit more intense. I'm stressing out, but I'm so excited to be here. And I'm excited to be back. It's been a little while for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was stressing out too. I mean, this is a really, really big undertaking that we've brought onto ourselves here. And it is our job to help you, the listener, decide if these rankings are real or not. So we're going to go through all of them. We had 4 very fun reveals last week. We have 4 more coming up tonight, but we cannot do this show without our other great guest with us tonight. And that is Kirsten Rayala. Kirsten, how are you? Going once. Kirsten, do we have you?
I love the champion music. Yes. Hi. I loved the champion music coming in. That got me very much in the mood for this conversation. And I'd say this week is ideal because last week would have been a lot of pressure. And as you get closer to number 1, that is grab popcorn time for me. I just want to watch all of you dish it out. I feel very comfortable with the folks that we're going to cover tonight because it's, how do you pick? How do you pick?
It's really tough. I thought this would be an easier task. I think that it's going to get really interesting. And the best part of this whole series, and what I really enjoyed last week, was how much feedback we got from our listeners, both during the live episode and after the fact. Keep your comments coming because I want to know what you think of the list. Before we get started with our reveals tonight, I would love to talk about some of the people that we revealed last week. So let's go over this one more time. Spoilers incoming for 47 through 50 on the list. And last week, we revealed on the show that 50 was Kevin Nealon, 49, Joe Piscopo, 48, David Spade, and 47, Mikey Day, as voted by you, the fans. Haskell, how do you feel like the listeners did so far on the list?
Well, first, I was really hoping, I was like, can we get some white guy representation in the top 50?
Oh,
and
don't you worry.
The first 4 reveals did not disappoint. But I think right off the bat, 4 deserving names to be in the top 50. Kevin Nealon being in the top, he had to get in the top 50. I think anybody who spent that much time on Weekend Update deserves that spot in the top 50. Pleasantly surprised with Mikey Day. I don't know. Recency bias can go back and forth. I think there's still a chance that some recent cast members end up a little bit higher than maybe they would if we did this 10 years down the line. And then I think there's sometimes where people look at it and they go, well, I'm not going to rank somebody that high until I know how it ends for them or I have some perspective. But either way, Mikey Day deserves to be in the top 50. He's had a wonderful last couple of years and has been kind of an anchor for the show in this current era.
Kirsten, what do you think? What do you think of the list so far?
Yeah, I second so much of what you said, Haskell. I'm glad that no spoilers. Hopefully, we diversify the list tonight. Joe Piscopo, I don't know, but not my era, admittedly. And I hear you on the recent cast member thing. That gets really complicated on how you rank and rate them and how much you've gone back into the archives to rewatch stuff and fall in love with it again. So it depends on so many things. I think once you get at this back end north of 45, arguable on where you place them. Just glad to see them included.
Yep, I agree. I think our thesis statement we came out with last week was, these four probably deserve to make the list in some capacity. I think Nealon, we were overall the highest on, probably a little low came in on the list here, but so far so good. I think we're doing good. And we're also going to be doing some fun comparisons to other famous rankings lists that we've seen throughout SNL history. So without further ado, let's head in and reveal number 46 on the list. And I'm very excited to welcome a discussion on a cast member I really enjoyed seeing on the show. And that would be at number 46, Tracy Morgan comes in here on the rankings list, who was on the show for 7 seasons, hired in 1996 for season 22, appeared all the way until 2003. We have seen him plenty of times since then. Some famous characters, we're going to talk about them. Obviously, Astronaut Jones, a lot of people know. Brian Fellows, Safari Planet. Had some really fun update appearances earlier on. Some interesting impressions as well. Has hosted the show twice as well. So a lot of people know Tracy. He is quite the character. And Kirsten, I'd love to start with you on this one. Thoughts on Tracy Morgan as a cast member?
No brainer that he is on the list. I personally would have liked to see him higher. I had the pleasure of rewatching a lot of his moments over the past week, and really in the distance from him being on, appreciate him even more for so many reasons. He's wacky and weird and funny and silly and all of those things. He was on during a fantastic era of the show. He has an extensive list of impressions and some characters. And I have a lot of heart for him overall. I find one of the things that I noticed the most was that most, if not all, of his kind of jokes and what he portrayed and who he portrayed aged quite well. And that was impressive because he was on at a time when we weren't so PC. So that was really nice to go back and watch and feel proud of.
Yeah, for sure. Haskell, what do you think about Tracy Morgan as a cast member? And then I'd love to ask you both what you look for overall in cast members and why they could be up your list.
One of my favorites, Tracy Morgan. I've been lucky enough. I got to go see him live a couple years ago. He's just so like infectious. You know what I mean? When he's on SNL, he's going to make you laugh because he just has this kind of like energy to bounce off of. So that's like one of my favorite things about him. In terms of where he's ranked, personally, I would have ranked him a little bit higher. I think in general, the consensus, I think he's kind of in the right spot. And I'll go into, when we discuss what we're looking for, I'll be able to kind of dive a little bit deeper into why I don't think he kind of rises to that level completely, maybe to get into like the top 40 or maybe the top 30. But just like we said, like wacky characters, man. And sometimes that's all it takes. And he did a little bit, I think, of like the deconstructing of sketch comedy because he did a lot of kind of just solo kind of awkward characters that were talking to the camera a lot of the time. And that to me, that's that deconstructing of it that I enjoy. But I absolutely love him. Personally wish he was a little bit higher, but I kind of like where he's ranked.
Yeah, so let's get into that discussion right now about what the two of you look for, and we'll apply this to Tracy and the other three that we reveal tonight. When you are putting together your own list of greatest cast members of all time, what are the criteria that you would be evaluating these cast members on? So, Kirsten, what do you think?
I'm going to echo something that you said last week, which was, do they seem like they almost came from a factory and they were built for this show? I do think Tracy fits that. So I agree with that one, that some folks seem to have come from some sort of SNL factory, and I believe he's one of them. He's got such a unique sense of humor that I can't imagine. I know he was successful on 30 Rock and such, but that almost seemed like it came out of this and the relationships he had. It seems like he needed to get on this for us to truly appreciate him and then to imagine him anywhere else and to open opportunities for him anywhere else. So yes, were they almost born and bred for SNL? there's a degree to which their legacy, like how much we remember them in the one-liners and the moments and the ways that we, maybe still have memes about older characters. Um, and being an all-around team player, I think the enthusiasm and the um, camaraderie that they bring to the overall cast, and do they become a part of the group and the team, that's really big for me, and that type of energy that they bring. And I say that because there are certain hosts that really sync with that are always the ones that stand out. So I recognize how much a part of the recipe that is.
Haskell, let's get your criteria.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same stuff. It's really like, can they go to that SNL toolbox, right? Can they do impressions? Can they do character work? Can they monologue? Can they both be vulnerable and feel like this brick wall in front of national television live from New York City? Like, there's that sort of that between those two things, but also on top of having all those SNL tools that we've seen, like it has to feel familiar, but also be something I've never seen before. And that's what's so beautiful about SNL, and that's what the greatest cast members did, is it feels like SNL. I understand you're going to do impressions, you're going to do sketch characters that if you've watched the show long enough, you know the patterns, you know how it all plays out, but it still feels like something I've never seen before. And that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those cast members that were able to do both of those. It sounds easy, but it's a very, very hard needle to thread. We've seen literally thousands of comedic actors and comedians who want to be on the show that can't do that. And we've seen dozens of those who have made the show and weren't able to do that. So this top 50 list is those people that were able to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you missed last week, my 3 criteria that I look for is a combination of importance, greatest, and best. So greatest would be the stats. Best would be, as Kirsten said, if you're built in a lab to be on SNL. And importance is, what is your legacy at the show? And I definitely feel like legacy at the show is the biggest positive in terms of how to evaluate Tracy Morgan's time as a cast member. Naturally, we're going to get into discussion here about what it meant to be a Black cast member on a show at a time where the show wasn't very Black. You had him and Tim Meadows on the show. Tim had already been there from a previous era. They brought in Tracy. They were trying to figure out how to use them. Tracy ends up playing a lot of Black women on the show. And we obviously have seen Keenan and others talk about, how that has affected, people's abilities to contribute to the show. So it's definitely an interesting discussion as to, Tracy's time and place in his era. He's not Garrett Morris, but was he used to the fullest extent that he could have been? I think that's an interesting thing here, but I do think he has an important role as a Black man on SNL. So for me, legacy is certainly important. I think when it comes to numbers, we could talk about that a little bit. His sketch per episode average is 2.24. And that is pretty low. It's 85th all time among cast members with 30 or more episodes. So on an average episode, you may see him probably twice, which isn't so great. And 139 episodes on the show, he was shut out 6 times. So 6 of those 139 episodes, he basically was there and did not get any sketches on the air. The analytics will fight against him. Was that Tracy's fault or was that the system? That's a big question to ask. And then there's the best comparison, which is, is somebody who is built in a lab to be on SNL at its best when they're playing themselves or versions of themselves? And I do feel that Tracy is a cast member that played themselves as good as it can get. Almost like we talked about with David Spade. You knew who Tracy Morgan was as a personality whenever he was, between sketches, talking to Lauren, talking to the host, you knew who he was. Whenever he played Brian Fellows or Astronaut Jones, those were versions of Tracy Morgan. So I think that, all those criteria that I talk about, I may be the dissenting opinion here. I think that because there's positives and negatives, I actually wonder if this is sort of the right spot for him as opposed to being higher on the list. So would love to open up this discussion to both of you to see what you think of that. Haskell, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I was going to talk about a little bit, is that sketches per episode and him playing himself sort of intermingle. Like, one of my favorite, Tracy Morgan moments is kind of his, is him getting to play kind of the centerpiece role in Will Ferrell's kind of Farewell. But beyond that, when you think of Tracy Morgan on the show, it's a lot of Tracy Morgan. It's not a lot of Tracy Morgan and this group or this other cast member that he kind of always could go to the well with. And you knew these two, him and somebody else were going to do really great work together. It was a lot of just Tracy Morgan. Now, again, I can't be the one to answer, is that his fault for maybe playing Tracy Morgan a lot? I also think he maybe just from different stories. I don't think he was at SNL in the greatest like teamwork time on SNL. Clearly, that generation that came after him with Bill Hader, Andy Samberg, Jason Sudeikis, Chris, like that group clearly got along really well. I think before him in the '90s, when you had Farley and Adam Sandler and Spade, those guys got along really well. I don't know like the teamwork when he was there, so it might not even be his fault. But I just think I would have trouble objectively ranking him much higher just because I feel like it was a lot of, you would get a Tracy Morgan sketch in the show, you'd get maybe an appearance, but you were missing that like those great kind of intercast moments that you get from, I think, people we're going to see higher on the list.
Yeah, and I just want to remind the listeners. I mean, we're talking about the best of the best here. We're talking about the top 50 cast members. I mean, these are some really, really great people on the show. So for me, Tracy being ranked at 46 isn't a knock on his ability. I just think that like some of the people above him, and we'll talk about maybe a couple tonight, I think maybe had more range, or at least we saw more range. Kirsten, what do you think of all of this?
I'm still going to say that I think he should be higher, and I'll tell you why. I think all of the things you've said, yes, it probably wasn't the best team at that time. I also think they probably didn't know really what to do with him, and it became very much him playing a caricature of himself. But if you rewatch sketches like Maya Angelou reads the Hallmark cards, or what is it, Uncle Jemima and the Pure Mash Liquor, he's not being Tracy Morgan, and he does a fantastic job. I think he likely started leaning into the Tracy Morgan bit, and or they said do more Tracy Morgan because it's so crazy, and then that's just what got him on air. And so I do think he had the capabilities, but it was the wrong time for him to get the opportunities. I will say there should have, yes, been more opportunities for women to play the parts that he played. But much like the amazing Kids in the Hall, when he played women, he did so in such an incredible way that wasn't offensive and avoided any kind of stereotypes. And he really empowered those women. Like he was just playing a woman. He wasn't overdoing, you know, or characterizing qualities about women. He was just being a woman. And that's what I loved about the Kids in the Hall guys. He could have fit within that crew. So I think he is better than we always got to see because the Tracy Morgan bit got a lot of laughs and was easy to go to.
Haskell, what were some of your favorite Tracy moments when he was on the show? Those two words.
Yeah, I already mentioned one of them. I love that he's kind of the centerpiece of that Will Ferrell farewell sketch. I think that's great. I was always a big Brian Fellows guy. That's one of my favorite sketches. That I think perfectly kind of encapsulates kind of his humor. And then I know it's not from his time on the show, but I would be so remiss if we did not mention everything that's happened since his accident. I think there's so many times, just unfortunately in life and when it comes to entertainers, that we don't take a step back and realize how much we enjoy certain performers until something happens and sadly they're gone. And in this kind of moment, when it happened to Tracy Morgan, I think a lot of people kind of felt that we just kind of were lucky enough that he didn't pass away in that accident, and he was able to come back and host the show, and he had some great moments, and he did it in this like great Tracy Morgan way. And I feel like that sort of brought him back to the show in a couple different ways. So just being able to see him come back to the show a handful of times over the last couple of years has been really awesome as well.
Definitely. There's that moment during SNL 40 where Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin come out, and obviously, the 30 Rock crew, and they are talking about how it really was upsetting that Tracy couldn't be there. And he had just I don't know exactly the timeline of all that, where he had recently had the accident, but then eventually he will come to host soon after. And it is a great moment for him returning to SNL. So, like I said, legacy, I think he checks all the boxes as far as legacy and archetype. He is like a very easily identifiable cast member in terms of knowing what their archetype is going to be on the show. So I think really that is such a positive for him and why he definitely elevates himself into this top 50. Kirsten, any other moments of Tracy's you would like to bring up?
I think, just for the record, he just makes me so happy. He just seems like someone I want to hang out with. Just so fun and funny. So I think of all of the different impressions that he did, and there's so many. Like oh my gosh, Al Sharpton and Bobby Brown, and again the Maya Angelou and Oprah, and like there are just so many versions of him that are just so fun. I don't know. I'm just gushing at this point. I'm a fan.
Yeah, that's okay. That's good. I mean, I remember Dominican Lou was a very popular update character when he first got on the show. It was like one of his things that he got on during those first few years. He did a lot of Star Jones during the View days. So
yes,
that was always very memorable as
I could
well.
snap you like a wishbone.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned all of the recurring characters we got. So for me, this is really fun compared to a Rolling Stone, which is something that we talked about last week or so. Rolling Stone put out these rankings before the 40th that are, I think I described them as cockamamie. I don't, I don't buy that they are legit, but I think it's always fun since they were referenced in SNL 40 to talk about where they put these cast members versus where our community did. And Rolling Stone actually had Tracy Morgan at 53 on their list. So a little bit lower than we have. Obviously, that we have 10 more years of cast members to put in there, but they had a 53 and ultimately said that he was much, much funnier on 30 Rock. And 30 Rock made us realize how funny Tracy Morgan is. Of course, here we're just talking about his time as a cast member and, of course, his legacy and cameo appearances host after that, but really just as a cast member evaluating him. So 46 for Tracy Morgan. Haskell, any final thoughts on Tracy?
Just, again, one of the most infectious, enjoyable cast members. Even if the stats don't completely back it up, maybe if he didn't hit the heights of of other cast members, a very, very well placed in the top 50. Tracy Morgan.
Kirsten, final thoughts on Tracy?
You just said it. He was recognized for his 30 Rock work because people embraced his comedic sensibility, and SNL hadn't quite found all those right spots for him. I wish he was higher, but I'm glad he's in the 50.
Okay, so 46 for Tracy Morgan. We have revealed the first 5 on the list. We have 3 more to reveal tonight. And this will be a very interesting discussion as we get to number 45 that we are going to reveal. This is definitely a star of Saturday Night Live at number 45. And that is the original star, Chevy Chase, our sketch leader from season 1, who appeared just season 1 and a little bit longer, 30 episodes on the show, has hosted 8 times, has a huge legacy at the show as being what we say, quote unquote, the original star of the show. Comes in from National Lampoon Radio Hour, gets put on the update desk that was originally intended for Lauren, and Chevy takes it and is really seen as like a leader. Everybody knows him for the Pratfalls, the Live from New York. So that was him. And then, of course, his Gerald Ford impression. He kicked off the presidential impression. So legacy at Saturday Night Live is pretty much as big as it gets, but he had a very short run as a cast member. So interesting to talk about. And of course, fair to say a little bit controversial outside of the show and I guess inside of the show as he came back in future years as well. I think this is a fascinating discussion as Chevy comes in here at 45 on the list. Haskell, let's start with you and your thoughts on Chevy.
Very happy that I am just giving my opinion and I don't have to edit this list. This is really, really tough for everything you mentioned. Like when I talked about, what I look for in a cast member, you're almost talking about a lot of the things that Chevy Chase helped create, right? With Weekend Update and presidential impressions and the Live from New York, like from day one, Chevy Chase helped create what we think of now, 50 years later, of what SNL is. So what does that what does that mean? But on top of that, he was only at the show for a very short amount of time. Like it's almost like the Sandy Koufax of SNL. Like the high is really high, but is it long enough? That's a really tough discussion to have. I think we can all agree, and I'm speaking purely based on what he did at the show. I'm not here to talk about anything that Chevy Chase has done or said backstage. He's deserving to be in the top 50. On the eye test, I just feel maybe a little bit higher just on legacy points alone, like what he needs to show. In terms of like great moments, Chevy Chase's, I think, great comedic moments, even with his pratfalls and Weekend Update, his great comedic moments that most people are going to know him by and remember him by are after SNL. It's his movie career. So I'm not here to tell you he was, a groundbreaking character performer on SNL, but it's really, really hard to ignore some of the things that he put in place for the legacy of the show.
I think this is a super tough discussion. This may be one of our toughest cast members to figure out where to rank them, because I think that the longer the show goes on, the more I could put him down my list, because I think that only doing what he did for one season and a bit, and really that bit is just a few episodes in season 2, it becomes like, sort of less impressive compared to what people are doing now. And maybe the game is different. I think that's a sports discussion we often have, which is like, how do you evaluate people in different atmospheres throughout different eras of the show? But like I said, legacy is so important, really created a lot of the things that we talk about as regular things nowadays. So Kirsten, what are your thoughts on Chevy Chase here at 45?
You've both said some really interesting things. Hot take, I'm not a huge fan of Chevy. But Haskell, what you mentioned about some of the things that he perhaps implemented, and I'm curious to know if we can validate that he originated some of those. Because are we giving him all that credit? I don't know.
Well, like what?
Do we know? Live from New York and Update and just the formats and some of the things that he introduced. Are we giving him that credit?
Well, I'm giving him the credit for performing them on screen.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
then
I think you have to credit, like, just to put it out there for any of our fans. I think you have to say, like, we obviously have to credit Lauren and Dick Ebersol for the creation of a lot of this stuff. Michael O'Donoghue for writing a lot of this stuff. Herb Sargent for Update. Like, there are people to credit behind the scenes. But as far as anybody's concerned, if you are born now and you're going to watch season 1 in 15 years from now, you're still going to go back and see that Chevy Chase is the star of the show. Like, that's never going to be taken away from him.
And then, John, what you said around, going back and watching it, and perhaps the game has changed because there are so many more impressive characters and update anchors, etc., that I would rather watch. If I'm going to be objective, I don't think all of this stuff is aged well, but I could probably say that about a few other people also. And it felt very much like the Chevy Chase show. I think he was in some sketches that he let others shine, Samurai and such, but a lot of it, I think, was him really enjoying the Chevy Chase experience on SNL. So I think he should be included for all the reasons that you both list. And I wouldn't put him higher than 45 at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is our
he's
first.
Well placed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is our first original cast member we're talking about, and I think, like I said, the earlier we would have done this in SNL's legacy, I think he's higher up the list. Rolling Stone had him at 10 on their list, which is ridiculously high. They said that he's an underrated cast member and talked about they were talking about his Ronald Reagan impression. I don't know why they were talking about that, but which he did once on the show. But for me, like I said, I just think that, like, the importance of what we did was so great. And he got, like, he had this moment where he comes out at the 40th anniversary to all of these applause. And it's so great to praise Chevy and all the things he brought to the show. And again, I'm not taking away anything that happened in 1975, but again, like there are so many more impressive things to me that kept the show going, or that, we built these long arcs of cast members who ended up having ups and downs on the show and ultimately end up, becoming these like legacy cast members that to me are truly the greatest of all time. That I think that Chevy becomes a bit of a footnote in that discussion, which is like he started it, but he didn't continue it. Now, if Chevy Chase had stayed on the show and continued throughout the first 5 years to do what he did, like let's say we extend his stats for 5 years, which by the way, 5.20 sketch per episode average, which is sixth all time among people with 30 plus episode. He was on for 30 episodes, so we'll call that the Chevy Chase line. 5.2, that is massive. That is at least five sketches, if not more, per episode that you are going to see Chevy on screen during his time as a cast member. If he kept that up for a few years, no doubt to me, he is a top 10, if not top 15 cast member of all time. But it was short. So it's a very interesting discussion. Haskell, would love your thoughts on that and some moments from Chevy that you really remember that would have put him here in the top 50.
I do think the number is impressive, especially when you consider like when he was there, it was not necessarily Saturday Night Live, the sketch show. It was Saturday Night Live, the variety show. So there was time being spent elsewhere besides just kind of cramming in sketches. So that's an impressive number. That's kind of hard to get around. As for moments on the show, like I said, when it comes to, starting update, doing the first live from New York, those are like great moments. That first live from New York is nothing, I think, like particularly hilarious or great. It's groundbreaking because it became groundbreaking. If they had did that on the first show and then abandoned that idea, I don't think anybody looks back and goes like, what a cool moment. It's just like, oh, they must have thought to do that. But there is one groundbreaking sort of sketch that he's in that's still talked about today. It's a tough sketch to talk about, but it's taking SNL, it's taking one of the greatest comedic voices of all time. That's Richard Pryor. That's that word association sketch. I fully admit it's a hard sketch to kind of discuss today. But man, was it I think people back then knew kind of maybe if not the importance, just kind of the moment that was. And even now looking back, I think you can understand like what that meant for SNL, what that meant for Richard Pryor's career, what that meant for NBC. Like that is a really kind of monumental sketch. So to me, that's kind of the moment for him.
No doubt. I totally agree with you. That is a must watch for anybody going back to season 1 of the show, to go back to that prior episode and see how that all went down. Kirsten, for you, I know you said you're not the biggest fan of Chevy in general, but going back and watching that original season of the show, do you have any moments for you that stood out?
Well, Haskell, well said. I mean, I concur with you 100% on kind of the gravity of that moment and what that meant in so many ways. So yes. I mean, this feels so silly comparably, but like Land Shark and all these other ones are just so silly. I know was he technically in that? Sure. The line delivery was great. You couldn't see him, but it was funny. I mean, if you watch Weekend Update, although I can't relate to many of the political jokes, I think there were some seeds planted that, have been carried on throughout all of the Weekend Updates since then, in just some of the delivery and some of the way that they tackled political topics. So I know he left quite an impression there, and I can appreciate that.
Yeah, that is for sure. I think that, it took a long time before people felt like there was another Weekend Update anchor like Chevy. I also think his legacy after being a cast member is something really interesting to talk about. His arc throughout the time at the show, where he departs the show, Jane takes over Update, and then in season 3 he comes back to host. He gets into this fight with Bill Murray backstage, which is known as one of the most notorious backstage moments in SNL history. Eventually comes back for season 5 and hosts again, and will then come back towards the end of season 6 has this moment that makes you feel like SNL's home again a little bit, and ends up doing Weekend Update with with old jokes from his time at the show, and is just really has like this interesting moment where he pops up a couple times throughout the Ebersol era, and really will keep hosting every few years for a long time, and will host 8 times at the show. And then there's as he got older and started just basically having no filter, has said some really unfortunate things, and other cast members from other eras have said a lot of really bad stuff about Chevy and their experiences with him. And it's just, he is so polarizing to talk about. I think it's just fascinating. So listeners, I'm very curious from everybody in the chat, as well as everybody listening after the fact. Let us know what you think of Chevy Chase. Is he so important to the history of the show that he deserved to be higher? Or is this the right spot for Chevy, which is right inside that top 50? Haskell, any final thoughts on Chevy Chase?
Just again, a guy who, for better or for worse, helped kind of define what we think of when we think SNL. So again, I deserving to be in the top 50.
Kirsten?
Begrudgingly, yes, put him in there. But those jokes, now that we know the Chevy of now, didn't age well, but it feels like he might have said those things today anyways.
Yes, that is for sure. All right. So we're halfway there tonight. We have started with Tracy Morgan at number 46, and then Chevy Chase at number 45. Let's get into number 44 on the list. I think this will be another very interesting discussion, especially given some recent events. But I think this will be hopefully a fun and lively one to talk about with the two of you, which is coming at number 4 here. Someone else who also was on the Weekend Update desk. That would be Jimmy Fallon coming in here at number 44 on the list. Jimmy Fallon will come onto the show in season 24, 1998. Comes on with Horatio and Parnell, and really is, just a very talented performer. You see him singing on Weekend Update, does some really incredible impressions. People will remember Sandler and Seinfeld impressions, and other ones he did on like Fred Stewart on Celebrity Jeopardy. Had some interesting recurring characters as well. Jarrett's Room, the Boston Teens. Since then has gone on to host 3 times. Also, got a great spot hosting late night, and then eventually the Tonight Show. And his legacy is certainly very strong. He's in a really interesting spot where he comes on, where it's really like, there's an established cast, and he, along with Horatio and Parnell, need to find their way in, and they certainly do. So Kirsten, how do you feel about Jimmy Fallon as a cast member and his spot on the list here at 44?
Yeah, I'm going to, again, the funniest, most interesting time to be talking about him, if you read the news. If I put that aside for a moment, he does seem like someone who was made to be on a show like this. Like, it was Hollywood or bust for him. That's just seems to be in his DNA, that he wants to be a performer and, sing and dance and be in front of an audience. And if you look back at some of his earlier episodes, he's just this fresh-faced kid with a guitar, almost trying to be Adam Sandler. Like, he wanted it so bad. I think he was a great fit for the show. Like, you've got here 77 impressions. It's like it could do so many things. So I agree that he should be on the list. I think, like him or not, he's hosting the Tonight Show. Like, people do like him. People do appreciate his sensibility, comedic sensibility, and what his energy and all the things that he brings. I can see why it's polarizing, because his aw shucksness is sometimes a bit too much for people. But I think he deserves to be on the list. I think being in the 40s is right.
Haskell, thoughts on Jimmy Fallon coming in here at number 44?
Well, I think it's no doubt that when Lorne saw Jimmy Fallon, he saw a leading man. I think he cast him to be his next leading man. I think he had everything that Lorne was looking for. He could do impressions, he could sing, he could do character work. I think what ultimately works a little bit against Jimmy Fallon is that I don't think he realized, or he didn't reach his potential as a leading man until he left SNL, right? Like, it's really hard to, thinking back on it now, you're like, especially maybe if we move this discussion up a couple years, maybe even a couple months, you think about it, you're like, it's Jimmy Fallon. Like, he's going to host everything. He's hosting the Tonight Show. He's easy to throw in commercials. He's so recognizable. And it's really hard to think about. He left SNL and kind of fell on his face, because I think part of it was when he left SNL, he wasn't a household name because he didn't really make himself a household name on SNL. And that's including having plenty of time as sort of the de facto leading man, plenty of time on Weekend Update. I think he just missed his potential on SNL. He did not have a bad SNL career by any stretch of the imagination. He's deserving of the top 50. I think I wouldn't have any issue if you slid him up anywhere from 5 to 8 spots. But I think if you look at all the tools that he had and all the opportunity that he had, it might be a little bit of a disappointment that we're not talking about Jimmy Fallon in the top 25.
Yeah, I think, to echo what you said, I think he was one of SNL's greatest prospects. And he ended up not being, to me, in the upper echelon of cast members, but just a very good one. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, like I said, characters, impressionist, he had some like recurring bits. I think that, I think that his era for me, like I'll always remember Jimmy Fallon for really bridging the gap sort of between post Will Ferrell and into the Bill and Andy and Kristen Wiig, that era. Like I really feel like Jimmy just sort of helped that. I mean, it was such a big deal when Jimmy Fallon left the show because he was such a popular guy on the show. And I think I saw somebody in the chat, I apologize, that I can't scroll up just to see who said it, but somebody said like, this is like the cute guy persona that they've sort of tried to emulate like ever since. I think he like plays an important role in terms of his time on the show. And there's like an archetype for somebody like that. Could he have been an all-time great? I think there was potential there. I just don't know that he ever achieved it because I think that, there was a lot of things going on during that time of the show that, outside in the world post 9/11, I think that it's like, it was really tough to do comedy, but I mean, the numbers are interesting here. 3.6 sketches per episode. That's good for 41st all time among cast members with 30 plus episodes. 119 episodes he did. He was never shut out, never absent. So he appeared in every single one of them. So about, 3.5 times you would see him in a given episode. And my interesting comparison is that I think, likability factor, I think a lot of our listeners are going to say Kevin Nealon's probably a little bit higher on the likability factor. I just talking about his time as cast members on the show. But as far as analytics are concerned, like they're very, very similar cast members. Nealon does like 3 more seasons, but they're always like the 3rd or 4th guy on the show. Like they're never like leading the cast in sketch appearances. They're never dominating any given episode, but like they are really there on the depth chart as like the number 2, number 3, or number 4. And I think that's really interesting. I think Kevin Nealon does it in probably a greater era of the show, but Jimmy Fallon does it in a very interesting era to analyze. So those are sort of my 2 cents on Jimmy, who I think as a cast member had a pretty good career on the show. Kirsten, what are your thoughts and some other moments you really enjoyed from Jimmy on the show?
There's something really interesting in what you brought up around this kind of failure to launch. Because again, if you go back and watch some of his earlier stuff, he is so much more earnest and just like trying hard, and it seems to take it a bit more seriously. And again, then started having the run of the place a little bit with some of them, like with all of the stuff that he was doing with Rachel Dratch and the Boston kids and such. But then he just started giggling. It was just him and Horatio just started laughing their butts off, and I don't think that they got past that. And that's so much of what their reputation was now, and how people think of Jimmy on the show is just breaking character, which became something that was expected, which takes a lot of the magic out. When you see someone break who never breaks, then it's funny. But they were doing it every time and kind of pulling the focus a bit. So I think there's some failure to launch there with what he could have been on that show if someone like Will Forte, who was there at the same time, who was completely wacky, but we took very seriously. And as strange and as odd as his characters got, there was so much respect for what he was bringing to it, and Jimmy just seemed like the good time guy at the party.
Yeah, and that's what he's really best known for. I mean, we've all heard the stories about in the SNL 40 after party. He's basically leading what's
Yeah.
going on there with the party and the band, and that's Jimmy Fallon. And as host of the Tonight Show, obviously a lot, to not beat around the bush, a lot of issues have come out lately about his role and his dealing with some crew members and how he works with his staff and stuff like that. And of course, I'm not there, but I believe people when they say that there have been issues, but all I could talk about is his time on the show and his time as a host and our experiences with knowing him on Saturday Night Live for now. And there's a lot of good there in my opinion. But I think, Haskell, one of the most interesting things about Jimmy is that if I was to go to a non like SNL super fan in the way that our community is and walk up to them and say, hey, I'm doing a ranking of the top 50 SNL cast members of all time, where do you think Jimmy Fallon landed on the list? I think they would say he landed in the top 20 because he is such a popular name and he's very well remembered for laughing in the sketches in probably a good way to the non-super fans. But I think for us to really dive deep into the sketches, that takes away from his legacy on the show. So I think he's a fascinating character to talk about. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Like it's like a casual thing. It's also, if you're not a super fan of the show or you're into the show the way that, we are or the listeners are, you're not thinking about Jimmy Fallon, the cast member. You're thinking about what Jimmy Fallon did, what he's done on SNL. And he's been very much boosted by some return appearances. He has some really good hosting appearances. Also boosted by his wonderful chemistry with Justin Timberlake. And, when they've been on the show together and when they've worked together, I think there's certain things that just on the Tonight Show, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people that would just mistake certain things he's done on the Tonight Show, even though they're years apart, for SNL work. So here's a guy, if you asked us to really, we're not ignoring completely what cast members have done when they come back to host or make appearances, but really we are looking into their time as a cast member on the show. If you just took Jimmy Fallon's body of work as a cast member, as a host, as a friend of the show, as a cameo, he absolutely ranks higher. And I think that's what you're getting into a little bit, is that that would kind of help him out a little bit. So yeah, I think that's kind of a big part of it.
Haskell, do you have any favorite moments of his for you on the show?
Funny enough, for somebody, I feel like I've been really harsh on him, and there's a lot of moments I love. As you guys know, I'm about a half hour outside of Boston. If you can see over my, I don't know how cameras work. If you see over my shoulder, I have my Red Sox 2004 World Series kind of framed. So I love the Boston teams. I grew up loving Nomar. So when Nomar showed up, that was amazing. Unfortunately, that is a clip that seems just lost to time. Very hard clip to find. And then talking about him coming back, that season 37 monologue with him singing "It's Good to Be Home" to "Baby Come Home for Christmas Time," which is my favorite Christmas song of all time. So I think that's kind of why. But also just a cool sketch. If you guys watch the Christmas sketch show or clip show that they do every year, that has now replaced the Cookie Monster as the new kind of what they use for the monologue. So I think that also has some legs as a memorable moment. And I'm a big, I love him as Barry Gibb. I will sing that theme song probably a couple times a week in my head.
Yeah, it's so great. I got to talk about that a little bit, but I got to talk about Justin Timberlake on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast that came out today. So quick plug for that show. But yeah, those are some really fun moments from Jimmy. Kirsten, what about you? Any fun moments you want to talk about?
You reminded me that, whenever him and JT were hanging, it was going to be fun. Justin grounded him in just enough of a way that it produced really great work. You could tell they were friends and they had the Gibb brothers and all those moments. I don't think he'll be remembered for Weekend Update. I think similarly, if you asked someone who's not listening or a super fan, if he was on Weekend Update, they probably wouldn't remember. But I have two sketches that I really, really recall fondly and rewatch. One of them is Mick Jagger in the mirror. Loved that. Exactly. Getting out the finger guns, like, especially because what we've heard of Mick Jagger, the not funny, like, to get that put through feels pretty tremendous. So that was my favorites. And the other one is cork soakers. I had to say that right.
Yeah, be careful.
Also, he was in Cowbell.
Yes, that is true. He does laugh a lot during Cowbell, but
He does.
but we
Yeah.
all were.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think that Cowbell, similar to like the first Debbie Downer, like those are like sketches that like Jimmy laughs a lot in, but they're also like big moments that transcended the show. So it is interesting how you dissect all of that. I'll say like non-canonical, but I absolutely love the SNL 40 monologue with him and JT. I think that made me just like fall in love with the show all over again and really inspired me to go back and watch the show. And the truth is that like, you know, for everything we're talking about, I think Jimmy Fallon loves Saturday Night Live. Like, I think he loves being there. I think he loves the atmosphere of the show. When he comes back, I think it's meaningful for him. And just like, you know, I think he never forgot about his time there. And obviously that naturally flowed into his time at late night and the Tonight Show. But for me, I just think he was having so much fun every time he was on screen. And some of the other cast members that we got to talk about, they don't necessarily show that. So, you know, SNL in a way that, you know, is a show about having a good time and enjoying life and being able on a Saturday night to like enjoy and laugh about some of the hardships in the world. And Jimmy's very emblematic of some of that, at least on the show. So I have a lot of really fond memories of some of the things that Jimmy did on the show. As far as his connection or his rankings in Rolling Stone back then, Rolling Stone had him at 36. They said killer impressionist. They brought up his Van Morrison impression, which, by the way, I had to look up because I was like, but he's had some really fun impressions of the show. I didn't remember that one, but yeah, 36. I think like with the addition of some new cast members, potentially it'd be about the same. So Rolling Stone, you know, not that bad. They've had worse takes, but that's an interesting one there. Okay, Haskell, any final thoughts on Jimmy Fallon, number 44? Too high, too low on the list? What do you think?
Just about right. Just I keep coming back to the same thought, which is that I just feel like most people get SNL when they're young. I almost wish we could have saw Jimmy Fallon on SNL when he was a little bit more mature. There's a famous story where he auditioned for the Dana Carvey show, and Louis C.K. was the head writer of the show and didn't like Jimmy and really kind of didn't want Jimmy on the show. I almost wish like, could he have done the Dana Carvey show? The Dana Carvey show goes the same way. It's not around a long time. And then he gets scooped up by SNL and see what he has with that experience. Because, you know, even late night Jimmy Fallon, of course, Tonight Show Jimmy Fallon versus what he was on the show is a completely different beast.
Kirsten, final thoughts?
You know, I really have to commend him for kind of the creativity that he brings to anything that he tries to create as an experience, whether that was on SNL or on, you know, Tonight Show. His enthusiasm really does shine through, and his love for what he gets to wake up and do every day is pretty awesome. So that does go a long way. And you're right, like there is so much that he offered to the show. I think he's well placed in the 30s where he is.
Well, we have him at 44, just to clarify.
Oh, sorry, the Rolling Stone one. Yes, I think he's well placed. I think we both placed him well. I don't disagree with theirs, and I think ours is also kind of right. Maybe I think he could have been a bit higher, but I'm a little clouded by what's going on in the news. And they're just great people. How do you do this?
Yeah. For sure. Fair enough. I had a very interesting discussion with myself as I was like, oh, this is going to be really interesting to talk about Jimmy Fallon right now when I knew what the list was and I knew when we had to talk about him. So anyways, you know, all good. And I'm very excited to bring in this next cast member that we are going to talk about, the final reveal tonight, number 43, before we take a break into next week. And this will be another fascinating discussion here at number 43, a more modern cast member to talk about. And that would be the one, the only Bowen Yang that we've talked about many times over the last few seasons because we got to cover him on the show throughout his time as a cast member. 4 seasons on the show only so far, but got up into the top 50 list here at number 43. He joined as a writer here in season 44, 2018, then joined the cast in season 45, 2019. Really so many firsts for him as far as legacy is concerned. A Chinese American on the show, openly gay. There's a lot, and there have been a few others prior to him, but really just, so important as far as, filling other archetypes, characters. He talked a lot about how they needed Akira Yoshimura to play every Asian person that's been on the show for 40 something years, and finally they had Bowen. Some interesting characters that he's gotten to play, versions of inanimate objects like the iceberg. People will fondly remember the trend forecasters from last year, and interesting discussion to have as far as what he's done so far in the show, because the book is not closed yet on Bowen Yang, yet people feel and have voted that he should be in the top 50 so far through 4 seasons at the show. So Haskell, what are your thoughts here on Bowen at 43?
First thing, when you said 4 seasons, kind of hit my ear weird. I know it's been 4 seasons. It just feels like Bowen has made himself such an important part of the DNA of the show right now that it feels like he's been there a little bit longer than that. I think Bowen Yang rightfully ranked a little bit higher than Tracy Morgan, and I'll tell you why. I feel like they have very similar styles in their own way, that when they take the stage, it's them. But I think Bowen has done a much better job of taking Bowen's take on a character, being Bowen Yang, but losing himself in the character a little bit more. He's not, I think, the strongest character worker that the show has or has had. I think he is very much Bowen Yang in a lot of his characters, but that's okay. Like, I think some people in the show just do that really well, and he's one of them. 43. Listen, it might be, this is incredibly difficult. It might be a little bit high for me right now, and then a little bit low for me in a couple years, if that makes sense. Like, I think maybe he's hanging around in the low 40s, but trending a lot higher than that. So it's tough. It's really hard to do this without the perspective that we get from some of the other cast members who we've had literally decades to kind of look back at their work.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most interesting part, right? Is like, where do you put these people who we don't have the full perspective on yet? And frankly, with so many people leaving between 47 and 48, the expectation was that Bowen was going to take over the show. I think he went second overall in our draft last year as far as cast members were concerned. And statistically, he didn't necessarily hit that mark. Like, he didn't take over the show. I don't think anybody watched season 48 and felt like Bowen Yang really took over the show. He finished 4th in overall sketch appearances in season 48, up from 11th in season 47. Look, he's definitely one of the major players at the show. There's a lot of Bowen sketches that we did get to see, but has he taken over the show yet to the point where we could say, okay, like there's a really, really strong legacy, besides all the archetype stuff, and that's a big question for me. But he also has had some really big moments and is becoming an extremely popular figure. So, Kirsten, a lot to talk through and parse through as we discuss Bowen Yang. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love Bowen Yang. Number one, huge fan. So I really do love that he's on this list. And yes, it's early, but I think he's an exception because he's made such an incredible first impression and came out of the gate so strong, with so much confidence and with such fun character work. I know you said, I think, Haskell, that, not necessarily the best character, but when I think of even, Iceberg, but then we have that version of Oompa Loompa, and we're getting this kind of these different strange and odd characters and their take on something, all delivered with this very trademark kind of vernacular, this type of really fast delivery that feels very young and very current. I think, how do you not make an impression? He certainly stands out, and the fact that people have voted to put him on here, I think, says we anticipate that he should be on this list in a few years, but we're giving it to him now because we know he'll be on it. Like there's a confidence among the voters as well that he deserves to be there. In high school, wasn't he voted most likely to be on SNL? And that's an amazing dream fulfillment right there.
Yeah, that's and I was voted most likely a podcast about SNL, so it just all comes full circle.
There you go.
Yeah. Statistically, it's interesting, right? Because, all of the discussion we've basically had about Bowen throughout the last 3 years is him, as a cast member on the show in comparison to other cast members that he's been on the show with. And what's really different about this discussion is now we're talking about Bowen versus every other cast member that's been on the show in its history. And is he the 43rd greatest cast member of all time? Well, statistically, it's interesting because statistically, he's at 2.72 sketches per episode. So that is up more last year. He's only been shut out once in season 46, episode 2. He was absent once. He was absent for that Paul Rudd episode. So that doesn't take him down necessarily. But, 2.72 sketches per episode, that to me is a little bit low. When I'm talking about the greats of the greats, I think we have to start looking at like at least the 3 mark. I think that's for sure. I don't think Tracy hit that either. So we'll discuss that at the end of the show. But Bowen, for me, is still has some work to do, I think, to get higher up the list. But I do wonder if we may look at season 48 in retrospect as a really big adjustment season for a lot of these players who are ready to take that next step. And assuming he's going to stick around in 49 and 50, I wonder if now he will take that leap because he knows what it's like to be a star of the show, to have all the writers want to write for him, to be that leading person. And he just needed a little bit of like a break to sort of get to that point and really boost himself up. So that's what I'm hoping to see from Bowen moving forward. Haskell, what are your thoughts? And do you have any best moments that you'd like to talk about from Bowen Yang?
Yeah, I actually think the sketches per episode, I was surprised it was that low. I just feel, like I said, I just feel like he has an imprint on this current show. I was surprised to see it where it was, but numbers don't lie. So that's the thing. One sketch, it's not really a Bowen like specific sketch, but the Sarah Lee sketch with Harry Styles is one of my favorites of that season. I think it's hysterical. There's a few, like, again, he made the iceberg kind of really famous. And there became that thing of like Bowen playing these inanimate objects. They're hit and miss for me. One that I really enjoyed was him playing the Chinese spy balloon. And I just loved him like kind of like green screened on that, like just plain ocean background. And that was probably the one that I enjoyed the most.
Kirsten, what are some of your favorite moments from Bowen Yang?
Iceberg was a real stop and pause and take that in moment for me. That is so memorable when that first came on. It was so exciting just to see that happen. Haskell, you talked about being surprised, but that for me was a big one. And then Chen Bao, was it Trade Daddy? Was that his nickname? He came back and he did it again in a different way. Started that character off and you thought, okay, he's going to play on this certain stereotype. And then he took that in a completely different direction that I really enjoyed. So those are 2 that stand out. And, he's done like Elton John and Fran Lebowitz and George Santos and Takai and Kim Jong. He's done some funny impressions that I enjoy, but it was those 2 Weekend Update moments that really cinched it for me.
Yeah, I just think that, Bowen Yang has such natural charisma. I do really think that he's meant for SNL. That's one of those criteria that I look for is just like, are you made for the show? And I do think he is. I just think that he comes in at a time where it's just like there's not a lot of great places for him. He does like the typical shtick that you'll see from a lot of new cast members, which is like find your role on updates. So we get to see the Chen Biaos and see how he ends up. Some of his best moments that we have on there. We have 4 Weekend Update moments up on the graphic that we have on screen if you're watching on YouTube. So he's naturally found his place there. And he just is in the process of converting over to a sketch performer that's in a lot of sketches in the night. And I do think that sketch per episode average, which is 72nd all time, tied with Sashir Zameda, is like a very interesting one that I think is going to continue to rise as we go through. So, again, very, very hard to parse through a cast member with only 4 seasons. I had a much easier time talking about Mikey Day last week because he had, a couple more seasons on Bowen. He also had a few more as a writer. So for me, that sort of, ups the legacy. I think Bowen Yang has some work to do, but he could get there. I could see him getting there. So I'm excited to get to see what we're going to get from Bowen. And I do understand why the current fans really felt like they wanted to put him on the list. Haskell, any other thoughts on Bowen overall?
Yeah, it'll be fun to revisit this in 10 years when, whatever's replaced the magazines and podcasts decide that they're going to make their definitive list ranking of cast members to see where Bowen Yang ends up. I don't want to miss, the opportunity to, tip the cap to him for representation. I think that is a big part of his time on the show. I think he wears that like a badge of honor. So he definitely deserves credit for that as well.
100%. What about you, Kirsten? Any final thoughts on Bowen?
Yeah, I agree with you, Haskell. And that sketch that he did with Simu was just a fun way to include that. And finally, not as an impression done by some white guys. I think we should set a date for 10 years from now in our calendars right now and be like, remember that conversation about Bowen Yang? Look at him now. And hopefully he's higher up that list because he delivers on all the things that I want him to.
Well, I look forward to it, getting back into the rankings 10 years from now, but we still have a ton of more rankings to get to on the show. So before we wrap up tonight, we'll do this fun segment that we're going to do every week. So first, let me bring up the rankings that we have so far. So the 8 that we have revealed on the show. And here we go. So these are numbers 43 through 50 thus far. So 50, Kevin Nealon, 49, Joe Piscopo, 48, David Spade, 47, Mikey Day, 46, Tracy Morgan, 45, Chevy Chase, 44, Jimmy Fallon, and 43, Bowen Yang. Every week, I've been putting together my personal rankings and reordering the list to, where I see. And I'm totally open to being convinced as to who should be on top of who. But I would love to know from the 4 that were revealed tonight, so Bowen, Jimmy, Chevy, and Tracy, where you guys would all rank them 1 to 4. So Haskell, if you had to re-rank the 4 we revealed tonight, where would you place them? And chat, would love to see your thoughts too.
Very, very tough. I think from descending order from 43 to 46, I would go Fallon, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Bowen Yang.
Fallon, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Bowen Yang. Okay, I could see that. Kirsten, what about you?
I love Bowen, but I'm going to go Fallon, Morgan, Yang, Chevy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let me bring up my rankings so far. I'm gonna actually slot them in. So let me talk this out live on the podcast with you. So I think from the bottom, last week I had David Spade bottom. I think that I can't put anybody under David Spade. I think that as great as a guy as he is, and I just, for me, like, I didn't necessarily have the legacy. He's still lowest for me on the list. I think that Tracy Morgan and David Spade have very similar careers on the show, a lot of versions of playing themselves. I think I'd probably put Tracy up there. He's probably the lowest for me. I really love him as an archetype, but I think that as analytics are concerned, probably you know what? No, I'm going to switch that. I think you guys convinced me. I think I'm going to go Bowen over Tracy. Does that make sense? Should I go, Haskell, do you think I should go Bowen over Tracy?
I like Tracy over Bowen.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do Tracy over Bowen. That's this is a tough one, but yeah, I agree. Tracy over Bowen. I think Bowen probably has to do a little bit more to go over Tracy. I think it's an interesting one. So, okay, so I'm going to go Spade, then Bowen Yang, then Tracy Morgan. Above them, I think that's where I'm going to slot Chevy Chase. I think Chevy would probably be my 5th right now. Like I said, not long enough, but still has that legacy. Then I think Mikey Day, Joe Piscopo, Jimmy Fallon, then Kevin Nealon. Let me bring that up on screen for all of you so you could see my rankings in comparison to the cast rankings so far. And if you at home are doing this as well, would love to see your rankings. I think I'm going to go with that because for me, I think Kevin Nealon, Jimmy Fallon, very similar cast members in terms of, analytics, legacy, all of that. I think Nealon in a greater era. So for me, I have to put him at 1. Piscopo, still very important cast member. Mikey Day has a pretty strong legacy. Chevy, Tracy, Bowen, David Spade. Those are my 1 through 8 so far, as we revealed 43 through 50. So will be very interesting as we add 4 more cast members onto the list next week. There you go. So like I said, if you're doing this as well, send us your current rankings 1 through 8. Haskell, this was so much fun to get to talk about this with you. Did you enjoy yourself tonight?
Oh, this is awesome, man. This is what I live for. Just kind of just diving back in. It's a lot less. Listen, I told you I was stressed out tonight. This is a lot less stressful than doing a draft and competing with each other. So it's just fun, and kind of the randomness of it all too. Like, I know we're ranking them, but to dive into different eras and remember different moments of the show, such a blast, man.
Yeah, for sure. This was a great time to get to talk about this with you. So love to get to do that and have you back on the show. Kirsten, did you enjoy doing this tonight? Do you have fun going through these greatest cast member of all times list?
I really do. This is me nerding out at my happiest, is to be able to have these conversations. And again, I like Haskell, it's not the draft. Like, we're not competing. We just get to talk about things that we love talking about. And I do love that it pushes me to go and revisit sketches, specific ones, because that's always a fun bit of homework to do. No, this is great. I really love these conversations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to having more of these conversations next week with some other great guests, including patrons who are going to come on as well. So 4 more coming up next week. Kirsten, do you have anything you would like to plug to the listeners?
We in Toronto have our upcoming Generation Women event. It is an intergenerational storytelling event, generationwomen.ca. If you're in the Toronto area, it is October 24th.
Great. Thank you for joining us. And Haskell, thank you as well. Where can the listeners check out everything you got going on?
Well, I got a couple things. Tomorrow, September 19th, I'm performing at the Bleacher Bar at Fenway Park. So dress up like a Boston teen, Jimmy Fallon style. Come see me perform. And September 29th and 30th, I'm at the Rhode Island Comedy Connection opening for John Caparulo. If you're familiar with him, he's been around for a very long time. Very great road comic. I am so excited. And if you're in the New England area, I'd love if you came out to the show.
You are. That was my best mic memory. So follow us on social media: Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok to see everything we got going on. We're going to be posting these later on in the week, so don't spoil your friends. Let them watch the show, and then we'll reveal on social media the 4 that we did this week. We're also on Strike Watch every single week. So right now we have, according to some news sources, there's going to be some more meetings coming up later this week with the WGA and the studios. That's supposed to be Wednesday. So maybe we'll have some sort of update next Monday, and we'll have to speed through these rankings. And if not, we'll be back every single week to go through all of these. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Search up the Saturday Night Network, and you can leave a review and tell your friends about the show. I want to thank Haskell and Kirsten one more time for joining us, and everybody for our very lively chat we had here tonight. We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.